This is the Spartus Olympus. It has a foam-filled core, but not like most of the other Gen 3 paddles out there. I played with this paddle for a few weeks to see if it has a break-in period, and I found something new in an x-ray of the paddle that you'll want to know about. Let's get into it. So first, a disclosure. Spartus sent me 2 of these paddles to test for a potential review with no obligations. No money changed hands, and Spartus did not have any input on this video's production or get to preview it before it was published. But if you use my affiliate code to purchase this paddle, you get a discount and I get a commission, which supports this channel and allows me to keep making videos like this. The Olympus costs $200 and you can get that down to $180 with the code JohnQ. It's a hybrid-shaped paddle measuring 16.35 inches long by 7.65 inches wide, and it only comes in a 14mm thickness. The handle is 5.5 inches long, giving it room for two-handed shots. The biggest thing that sets this paddle apart from others is what they're calling the Ascension core. Basically, they're taking a standard polypropylene honeycomb core and filling each cell with foam. Now, this isn't a soft expanding foam, but instead it's a stiffer foam that's not supposed to expand. The reason this is important is because there have been issues with previous foam-enhanced paddles such as disc bonding, core corruption, and other breakage issues. So in theory, this won't happen with the Olympus, and it didn't happen during my testing. The purpose of the foam in the core was not to add power like other Gen 3 paddles that use foam as a springboard or a trampoline. Instead, the foam in the Olympus was intended to reduce vibrations and improve the feel of the paddle when hitting a ball. So besides the foam in the core, this is a thermoformed paddle, so it's hot molded with a unibody design, and it has edge foam in addition to the foam injected cells. The surface layup of the Olympus combines unidirectional carbon fiber and fiberglass, which gives the paddle a boost in firepower. One thing that surprised me about one of my paddles is that the edge guard is coming loose at the top. I thought this was a thing of the past, and I've only rarely seen it on thermoformed paddles. It might just be a one-off, but I thought I should mention it since it did happen to one of the paddles I'm reviewing. Here's an x-ray of the Olympus, which reveals something new that Spartus introduced in this particular paddle. There are some white areas in the neck of the paddle that I haven't seen anywhere else. I reached out to the owner and he said that it's a patent-pending technology they're calling the phalanx system, which is basically a polymer used to increase rigidity in the neck and to serve as a counterbalance to the foam-injected core. I ran my usual testing protocol on the Olympus and gathered a bunch of data to give you an idea of how it stacks up against other paddles on the market. The boxes at the top of the graphic give you the raw numbers, and the radar chart on the bottom shows where these numbers compare to over 250 paddles in my database. So here's an easy way to interpret this chart. High values over on the left side indicate more firepower, and high values on the top right relate to the paddle's control and forgiveness. And then the bottom of the chart tells you about maneuverability and hand speed. You can see on this chart that the Olympus is above average for power and pop. It has average spin, and it's below average for twist weight, swing weight, and balance point. This is a fingerprint of a paddle that's fairly high on firepower. It's slightly below average for control, and it's fairly quick in the hands. We'll see how these numbers and metrics relate to my impression of the paddle during gameplay in just a minute. Combining power and pop into a metric called firepower, you can see the Olympus is most comparable to other popular paddles on the market, such as the Gearbox Pro Ultimate, Versix Vector, and the Paddletech Bantam TKOC X 14.3mm. I'd characterize the Olympus as an all-court paddle right near the boundary of the power category. You definitely get good power with full swings on serves and drives, and I also found it to have good pop on counters and speed-ups. And it does have a good feel when you hit the ball because the foam does help with vibration control. And the first time I hit a ball with this paddle, I was like, oh, that felt really nice. But I wouldn't say the sweet spot on this paddle is large by any means, and when it's played stock, it's very much reflective of its below average twist weight. But the sweet spot can be broadened with parameter weighting, as I'll discuss later in the modification section. Still, even with parameter weighting, I wouldn't call this a forgiving paddle. You definitely notice a drop-off in ball response when you move away from the center of the sweet spot, but it doesn't feel completely dead or hollow when you hit off-center like thinner Gen 1 paddles. Let me explain. Honestly, it took me a good while with this paddle to figure out its overall ball response and its forgiveness. I think a lot of what feels like a smaller sweet spot is because it has a hot spot where the balls come off with a lot of velocity when you hit it right in the middle of the sweet spot. And then when you get right outside of that hot spot, it hits similar to a normal thermoformed 14mm paddle, but with more density from the foam. But it's the big drop-off in velocity between that hot spot and the surrounding sweet spot that gives the impression of a smaller sweet spot. But I did eventually get used to how this paddle plays, and I adapted to its more dynamic surface. I'd say this paddle suits higher level players better than beginners because it does require a greater level of accuracy than other more forgiving paddles. I think that players at the 4.5 level and above will be happiest with this paddle, and it might be a bit frustrating for players who don't have as much striking accuracy. Although this paddle was designed to not heat up and break in like other Gen 3 paddles, I did notice a slight break-in where it got a bit more powerful. This was most noticeable after I gave my paddle to a friend who played with it a lot over the course of 2 weeks, and when he gave it back, I compared it to a new Olympus, and the used one hit harder. I'd put the broken-in Olympus closer to the Paddletech Bantam series in terms of its overall firepower. So in my experience, the Olympus gets tipped into the power category after some use. I'm not sure exactly what's causing it, but I imagine things are just kind of loosening up a bit in the core, as all paddles tend to do to some extent. It does seem to have stabilized, and I haven't noticed any increase in power after the initial 2 weeks. And again, I want to be clear here, it's just a subtle break-in and nothing like the Yola Mod or the Gearbox Pro Power. As I mentioned earlier, I do recommend some parameter weighting to help with forgiveness. I'm using 1/2 gram per inch tungsten tape cut to 5-inch strips for each side, starting at the neck about an inch above the grip and extending up to the sides of the paddle. I did try a slice cap and it was okay, but I didn't feel like this paddle quite needed it because it already has a low balance point, probably because of the polymer injected into the neck that we saw in the X-ray. The Spartus Olympus is a foam-enhanced paddle, but the foam isn't used for power like previous Gen 3 paddles. Instead, the foam is used for vibration control and adding mass for plow-through and overall just making the paddle feel better when you hit it. In this sense, it's similar to the recently released Apes Pulse series, which also uses foam for forgiveness and feel instead of for power. So the Olympus doesn't seem prone to breaking like other foam-enhanced paddles. Although my paddles did get a little more powerful after a short break-in, they both stabilized at a power level below the most powerful paddles on the market. And like I said, I've been monitoring how the Olympus is playing and how it's performed for my friends and on forums, and so far, I haven't heard any complaints of huge power increases or core breakage since the paddle was released a month ago. Hey guys, Editor John here with an update. So a week has passed since I recorded this review, and since then on Discord, I've seen just a few mentions of some QC issues, so I wanted to bring them up here. So I've seen a few more people mention loose edge guards on their paddles, and I saw a couple of people mention that they had broken handles. And another person claimed that they cracked the surface of their paddle while hitting an overhead. And the same person also kind of dissected their paddle, removing the facing layers to expose the core, and there were a few polypropylene cells that were not filled with foam, according to that picture. So I haven't personally been able to verify any of these claims, but I did want to include them here so that I can give you all the latest information. And given that I also had a paddle with a loose edge guard, this does seem to be a QC issue that needs to be addressed. And if you're concerned about the reports of the handle breaking and the crack in the surface, you might want to wait until we know if these are real issues or just one-offs. I will say that the owner of Spartus is also active in the same Discord channel, and he's been responsive to these claims. You can get the Olympus at the Spartus website for $180 after a 10% discount using the code JOHNQ. Editor John here again with another update on discounts this time. So if you're watching this video right when it's released, you can take 20% off the Olympus from now through Cyber Monday or December 2nd. So Spartus originally planned to offer this 20% discount from Black Friday through Cyber Monday only, but you can use the code JOHNQ now to get the same discount early and all the way through Cyber Monday. There won't be any code stacking for the Black Friday sale, so you won't get a better deal than this. As I mentioned, I do think this paddle is better suited for more advanced players at the 4.5 level and above who do have good striking accuracy and who can adapt to a dynamic paddle surface that includes a noticeable hotspot. And that hotspot just makes it a little bit more of a complicated paddle that's more difficult to understand. But like I described earlier, I think the sweet spot is about average for a 14mm thermoformed paddle. But it hits like a power paddle if you hit it in the center of the sweet spot, and as you move just outside of that hot spot, it plays like an all-court paddle. Okay, that's it for now. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.